I think to understand where the sort of pinch points are, where the areas of agreement and contention are, to, I guess, keep the discussion moving in the direction of, well, it's interesting, but we need some outcomes from this, because I think there are some very practical pressures, particularly on policing, in terms of expectations to utilize available technology, tools and techniques now. And so there needs to be room for sort of proper debate and understanding, but there also needs to be some progress. So getting those things clear will be one of my priorities. In relation to the code, the statutory surveillance code for surveillance camera systems, I've fed back my views on where I think that could benefit from amendment and revision. It's been around for quite a while now. And then in terms of the more prosaically and practically, there is something of a backlog of decisions around that I need to do with my biometrics commissioner hat on, if you like, and so those are taking a lot of time, and also then just getting to meet all the key stakeholders and to hear what people are expecting, both of me and of the office, and also what they're offering and what they can bring to some of this area, which is both potentially contentious, but is enormously interesting and important to everybody.
Absolutely. Have you had a chance to meet many stakeholders yet? Have you been in the job about a month now, is it?
Yeah, this is week 5, and it's almost been back-to-back meetings. So allowing for the practical work that I've had to do, I needed to get through the Police and Criminal Evidence Act retention applications from the police. And I am now also well into the national security determinations that chief officers have made, because they can only be taken, both of those groups, by the commissioner, and there hasn't been one for a little while.
Okay, good. And you mentioned that obviously you're bringing the biometric side into this. How do you see the two roles of surveillance camera commissioner and biometrics commissioner piecing together?
I think there are some areas where they already piece together. So there will be applications to the biometrics commissioner to retain DNA profiles or fingerprints of people who have been caught on CCTV camera systems, but for whom there is some impediment to charge and prosecution. So there's some overlap already, but I think increasingly, as there are discussions around new biometrics, what is becoming possible technologically, the most obvious point of capture for some of those new biometrics will be existing established surveillance camera systems, particularly if it's obviously a sort of visual representation that's being captured and analysed, or if it's other areas such as sound prints or voice prints, for example, because I think most surveillance camera systems already have that capacity, either to switch it on very, very easily, or as an add-on, which will be very, very straightforward and very low cost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that the industry is seeing is an uptake in analytics within video surveillance systems, and part of that is everything from facial recognition through to, as you say, behavior analysis and things like this. How do you plan on working with? Obviously, there'll be a lot of work involved with the police and those kind of areas. But how do you plan on working with the private security sector, and for example, bodies such as the BSIA, for instance?
Yeah, I think the short answer is closely and regularly. There are a number of areas that need to be considered within the sort of joint responsibilities that I have. One of them is understanding what is technically possible and of course that changes all the time. There is then the legal permissibility issue, which as a lawyer I'm relatively comfortable and familiar with, and then there is the area of societally acceptable, which is of course often changing and is equally important. But I think going back to the first element of those, what is technically achievable, I think it's absolutely critical that I'm able to hear from industry, both in terms of standards and assurances, as you mentioned there, and also in terms of understanding the reality of product rather than the mythology. So there's a lot of noise and discussion about what can be done and what is being done, whether it's here or more elsewhere in the world in other jurisdictions. But I think that there's no substitute for hearing from the organisations and individuals that are using this technology and understanding myth from fact. And I've already started in a number of those areas. So I've already had some meetings that are around industry standards for things such as car parks and the use of camera systems, and also with providers and users of facial recognition software to understand, not necessarily for use within a public sector setting, but to understand how that technology is currently being used and to what effect.
Absolutely, and within those discussions, are you seeing that it's not just being used for perhaps surveillance purposes, but also for access purposes as well, for working out who is who essentially in entering and leaving buildings?
Yes, completely, and allowing access to the people who you want in and who need to be in, and to an extent, and also denying access to people that you have every right to exclude.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to be there's a couple of different routes, and of using facial recognition software at the moment, and I know the BSAA recently launched their guidance on the matter, which kind of covered those things, which is quite interesting. Why do you believe? I know you mentioned, I was reading the kind of introduction you given on the government website the other day, and why do you believe you mentioned the secure by default scheme? Why do you believe this scheme is so important? Obviously, it was launched by your predecessor, Tony Porter, I think at IFSEC 2019. Why do you believe this is so important for this sector?
I think there are real and legitimate concerns around once you create a dependency, you create a risk. I mean, that's just a fact, and so anything that could be done electronically arguably can be undone electronically. So having security as a design feature, as an elemental ingredient, right from the word go, must go hand in hand with both the utility of the product or service that is being put forward, and also of people's trust and confidence in it. It doesn't mean that there will never be glitches, or that there will never be single instances of things going wrong. That's just life. But I think there's a very real, possibly increasing need for users to understand the levels and layers of security that are built in to a product, and the time to do that is at the design stage, rather than as a bolt-on in response to life experience later. The same is true of privacy, of course, which is not the same. They're linked, but you can have things that are secure by design that don't necessarily meet the privacy requirements. But fundamentally, this is the same area. These are both areas of utility and making sure things do what they were promised to do and what they were intended to do when people signed up to them, and also reinforcing people's confidence. I don't think the starting point is zero, and you have to get them on board. I think people have become so familiar with new technology, particularly in a sort of secure and risk mitigation setting, such as, I don't know, personal banking or personal security. But I think it's reinforcing that, particularly in light of new applications of technology. I mean, to me, one of the things that I think we know is that a fundamental source of risk and weakness has been people's passwording of devices, or so either they were weak, or they were shared, or they were written down. So in some ways, the point of accessing the technology that was kind of user owned became the biggest security risk in the entire end-to-end process. And there are some features such as biometric features such as thumbprints and facial recognition that have dealt with that in a way. So I think it's important then to build on that where we can, but in a way that people have confidence in, then to say, this isn't just some sinister and covert way of getting my fingerprints or my image. This is a genuinely and demonstrably beneficial security application for the technology, which is otherwise fiendishly clever and difficult to get into. And then there is probably again increasing need to maintain security from sort of interference or hostile access. Once you bring things together, you create something that is therefore attractive for interference, for whether it's for personal gain or just for mischief.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing we tend to talk about a fair bit on IFSEC Global and IFSEC at the show is this idea of converged security and convergence, and bringing essentially physical and cyber worlds together to try and kind of give a more holistic approach to security. And do you think that's a really important message and an educational message for the industry?
Yes, completely, because they are about risk. And ultimately, this is almost old-fashioned risk management. And when you look at the very old the Treasury Orange book to approach, which I've always followed with risk management, where you treat, tolerate, terminate, or transfer it. The four principal ways of dealing with risk. Some of that involves transferring the risk to a system or a provider in a secure network. Some of it, of course, it does involve termination. It's very unusual for you to be able to design out every imaginable risk, but there will be some areas where that's exactly what the technology is being used for. So I think some of this is well established thinking, just in a new digital setting.
For sure. And obviously, the secure by default scheme is related to the cybersecurity from the vendor's side. Do you believe there's a responsibility as well for the rest of the supply chain for installers and integrators, for example, to improve their knowledge of surveillance systems and protecting them, so to ensure that end users' data is better protected in that sense?
Yes, because again, it's if you look at the entire ecosystem, there isn't a lot of point in mitigating or completely removing all risk in one part of it if another part of it is permeable or leaking or is just a source of vulnerability, whether that's for deliberate attack or whether that's just for sort of user error and clumsiness. It's an entire systems approach, and if you take that sort of ecosystem approach, it is a little like going back to the passwording, isn't it? To say that if all that money and time and thinking has been invested in creating something, and then the way in which I, as an individual, deploy it undoes all those benefits, then that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I think in a public sector setting, it's very important in terms of procurement, because this is public money being used to buy systems, and there needs to be an entire demonstrable and reliable value chain there, which if you dilute it in any one part, you've effectively contaminated the whole system.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think finally, really, on this one is do you foresee any kind of new challenges to the surveillance sector that your office will ultimately need to be looking at? For example, kind of the growth in drone usage and things like this. Are they things that you're going to start to look at as well within the role?
There's greater manifestations of the use of the technology, I think, all of which are exciting and all of which are potentially extremely helpful in terms of their reliability, their accessibility, their cost, but also they bring further potential risks with them that need to be carefully thought through in advance. They need to be consulted upon. They need to be deliberated over and then addressed. But I think it's not the technology. It is. I don't think that when I go for my MRI scan, I'm not putting the main part of my trust in magnetic resonance imaging. I'm putting in the person pressing the buttons. There's almost an assumption by me that technology will do what it was designed to do, and that it will be deployed in a way that has my best interests at the centre. And I think we need to be able to have that same approach to the deployment of technology in other sectors and some of the areas that my office is responsible for. Some of the challenges will be, of course, new ways in obtaining and accessing some of this, because it is potentially an interference with people's respect to a private life. So with all the human rights issues, there may be issues about feeling free to gather in public places, feeling free to have conversations, and so forth. So it isn't just about even secure and private data processing. It's wider than that. But I think the fundamental question comes down to, in the past, one of the principal concerns used to be, if you're procuring technological solutions in public sector procurement, would be, will the kit do what it's supposed to do? I think it's almost taken as given now that, by and large, if you're at the stage of bringing it credibly to market, it'll do what it was supposed to do. The challenge has to be, will the decision makers do what they're supposed to do? So will they use it in a way that they have explained in advance, that is supported by policies and procedures that are published and accessible to people, and that people understand the purposes for which that is being deployed, and they also understand how and where they can raise further questions and concerns. But if you think of the situation that policing is in at the moment, for me, there is no question the police will use technology as it becomes available to them, because most people would expect them to. And there is increasingly a legal obligation for the police to use new means that become available to them. The important thing will be that they do so in a way that is publicly accountable. But to that extent, that's no different from using other technology, new technology, whether it's drones, whether it's tasers, whether it's other forms of biometric capture. It is all about public accountability in real terms for policing, but allowing them to use all the new opportunities that technology is providing them with. Because there would be some technologies that I think it was, my question would be, how, if that were made available to you as a policing body, could you responsibly not use it if it's going to detect and prevent crime, keep people safe, and in some instances monitor the dangerous?
Yeah, some really good points there, and the balancing act of utilizing new technology that is going to help support keeping the public safe against also protecting privacy and things like this. I guess that is a key part of your role. So that's all really interesting. And I think another point that you bring up there is the need for guidance to be available for secure, whether it be private security or public security and police forces, to understand and utilize this new technology as it comes out in a justified and proportionate manner, as I think Tony Porter used to say. So that's yeah, really good points there. Fraser, I think that's probably the main parts that I wanted to cover. And yeah, that's all really interesting. So thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up, or a message to the security industry that you'd like to give, or anything like that?
I think that it's absolutely key that we're working together, both to push forward the boundaries of what is legitimately and proportionately possible in a public sector setting. And also to preempt and deal with some of the mythology in advance that says, you may have heard this, but in fact, this is where it comes from. Or actually, this is true. This is an element of this technology which might be deployed or has been deployed inappropriately in some cases elsewhere. And here's our response to it. But I think from industry, I don't think it's unreasonable if they're bringing new products to the public sector market, that the onus is on them to prove why it doesn't discriminate inappropriately, for example, to prove how it has no inbuilt harm that it would do to people, because they have both the information to dispel that and to prove that it fits that description, and also they have the resources and the IPR to do it. So I think that's really important, and that needs to be a kind of a starting point. If things are being procured on behalf of the citizen and with the citizen's money, then that citizen needs to be front and center of some of the discussions about, okay, we know what it can do, but we now need to know what it will do, what it will be used to do, and where are our kind of safeguards and avenues for query and challenge.